Welcome to CinemaScope. I'm Andy Nelson. In each episode, we map one genre, subgenre, movement, or mode, what defines it, what shaped it, and what it influenced. Today, we're closing out a chapter. Over the past several episodes, we've been tracing how World War II and its aftermath reshaped Hollywood genre by genre. From the moral crisis on the Western frontier to atomic dread externalized as invasion and mutation in science fiction, to the urban shadows of film noir, to the pressure-cooked American home of domestic melodrama, to the paranoid apparatus of the Cold War thriller. Today, we land on the final entry in that arc, post-war crime procedurals. These films don't externalize anxiety into monsters or spies, and they don't trap it inside a marriage. They take American society at its word, and then put it on trial. The courtroom, the precinct, the jury room, the prison. These are the institutions the post-war era built to deliver justice. And these are the films that watched them work and measured what they cost. We're going to be moving chronologically through 11 films, 6 on the main show, 5 more in the extended discussion for members. My guest today joined me earlier in this miniseries for our film noir episode, and there's no one better suited to close it out. Foster Hirsch is a professor of film at Brooklyn College and the author of numerous books on film and theater, including The Dark Side of the Screen, film noir, Otto Preminger, The Man Who Would Be King, and his most recent, Hollywood in the Movies of the 50s, The Collapse of the Studio System, The Thrill of Cinerama, and the Invasion of the Ultimate Body Snatcher, Television. Foster, welcome back to CinemaScope.
Thank you. Good to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you again with your fantastic book, Hollywood in the Movies of the 50s, looking at another of these genres that really kind of shifted and changed a little bit with
Can we just show this to
there it is. Yep, I've got my copy too. Look at that.
You've got your copy too. Okay.
Yeah, fantastic book. Lots of great information in there.
Thank you.
So with all the research and everything you did in the post-war period, I'm curious, we're going to be talking specifically in this episode about post-war crime procedurals. And with all of the studying and everything you did across everything going on in the 50s, is there anything that drew you specifically to kind of the procedural mode of films that we're going to be talking about? Is something with the crime procedures that you are drawn to that you really are passionate about?
Well, I'm a big crime film fan. I mean, film noir is sort of my I wouldn't say specialty, but I do hosting of film noir series. I've written about it, and I've gotten to learn more about it. But I actually saw, because I'm old enough, a lot of these films when they came out, and I was very drawn to the post-war crime film.
Yeah.
I'm not particularly drawn to the gangster story and the 30s gangster films, which I recognize are well done, but they're not of great interest to me. But I am interested in the post-war noir and actually during war noir. So we're talking about the 40s and the 50s and the 60s.
Right, into the 60s, exactly.
Into the 60s.
Well, for our conversation, we're going to be moving chronologically through 11 films. We're going to talk about 6 on the main show and 5 others we are going to save for members. The films we're discussing from 1947, Boomerang, directed by Elia Kazan. The Naked City from 1948, directed by Jules Dassin. Also 1948, He Walked by Night, directed by Alfred L. Worker and Anthony Mann. 1954, Riot in Cell Block 11, directed by Don Siegel. Also 1954, Night People, directed by Nunnally Johnson. 1955, we've got 2 films as well. Trial, directed by Mark Robeson, and The Phoenix City Story, directed by Phil Carlson. Then 1956, we have The Wrong Man, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. 1957, Sidney Lumet's 12 Angry Men. And then this should be right in your camp, 1959, Anatomy of a Murder, directed by Otto Preminger. And last, 1967, In Cold Blood, directed by Richard Brooks. If you'd like to access the member bonus content, you can join for $5 a month or $55 a year. Just head to truestory.fm/join to learn more. We'll be right back. So let's talk about kind of this mode of procedural films that we're looking at here. Kind of like, I want to talk big picture first as to like what makes this in this particular post-war period stand out? What makes it distinct? And is it what is it? Belief in the system that we're seeing here? Is it trying to figure out if the system actually works? We've talked about the Westerns, the post-war Westerns, where we kind of saw the heroes operating alone. Noir kind of bypassed institutions entirely. And then in the paranoia thrillers, it really kind of made the institutions the enemy. So is this saying this is the machinery, let's watch it run. Theoretically, it's going to work, but sometimes it doesn't. Is that kind of I
where
think we are?
What you just said is accurate. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And these procedural films look at institutions from a variety of perspectives. Some supportive, yes, in the end the system works. Others questioning whether the system works, or in fact showing how it can be undermined or challenged. So it's not one response or point of view, it's a variety of points of view. And some of the most challenging films, I'm tempted to say that Trial is the most challenging film we'll be talking about. And there are real questions there about the integrity of the system and how it can work with so much. That's a fascinating mid-50s film. Not the most successful film artistically on our list, maybe the least, but the most challenging.
Yeah.
The most challenging.
There's a lot to talk about with that one in particular.
There's so much going on in that film. I saw all the films again, Andy, to prepare for our talk. So they're all fresh in my mind. And I have to say, A Trial was the most problematic and the most challenging. And if I may jump ahead, the best is actually In Cold Blood, which I think is a masterpiece.
Having never seen it before, I'd only read the book. I was blown away completely by that.
It's an extraordinary film by the very underrated Richard Brooks.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But it is a stunning piece of filmmaking for sure. So we're at this post-war period in America. Part of it is like, I don't know. I guess the question is, are they trying to show confidence in the institutions? Because this is people coming back from the war. They're trying to give kind of a very, as we'll talk about for sure, a very documentary sense of how things worked. Very documentary to the point when we're looking at the opening of Phoenix City Story. It literally is a documentary for the first 15 minutes of the actual film.
Yes, it is.
Is that part of it, just trying to make it as real and authentic as possible?
These thrillers are part of a post-war documentary and semi-documentary movement where noir, and we're talking about streams of film noir here, where noir took a turn to the documentary, inaugurated by Louis de Rochemont, the famous producer of post-war semi-docs, North Side 777, template. And these films participate in that. They're also influenced in their quotes documentary authenticity by post-war Italian neorealism, which had an enormous influence on American filmmaking in the post-war period, more than I think most people realize. So these films are under two historical movements, a turn to documentary in film noir and the influence of location shooting and natural lighting and to some extent non-professional acting in Italian neorealism.
Interesting. Yeah. And especially with soldiers having come back from Europe, certainly you could see that they had probably seen some of that neorealism over there and recognized that as something that was in the storytelling that they had been looking
absolutely in the storytelling. And it's often overlooked that in the post-war period, American films went in two directions. The great spectaculars and color and widescreen, but also small-scale documentary, quotes, realism, because realism is always qualified in movies, realism. Yeah. So it's two different strains. What we're talking about in this list of films is the neorealist semi-documentary strain, which applies to each of the films that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah,
they all have a documentary cast to them, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
Every one of them.
Every single one of them. Yeah.
Every single one of them.
Is there an element, again, we've talked about this in a lot of these episodes. This is definitely the period of the Hays Code and the way that filmmakers were required to kind of like show things a certain way, very much kind of communist sentiment running through things. Is there also an edge of like an ideological push for these, kind of a statement of faith in the institutions? Is that something that, because I know we definitely see the dark side of institutions, but I think a lot of it is like the ideal of what we're striving for.
Well, I think the Hays Code, which handed down a very strict doctrine, crime does not and must not pay.
Yeah.
So if you committed a crime, you're going to be brought to justice. And so the institutions that the film presents are elements of the state that bring wrongdoers to justice. So under the Hays Code, the criminal could not get away with it. After the Hays Code was lifted, it becomes a different story in the late 60s. And it opens up the film to a much more complicated moral designation, much more complicated. But in this period, we're talking about crime could not pay. But some filmmakers very cleverly outwitted that. And very, very prominently, our friend Otto Preminger in Anatomy of a Murder.
I was going to say, that's a great example.
In the end, in that movie, Otto Preminger was a great foe of the Hays Code and the Production Code, and he was instrumental in knocking it down with Man with the Golden Arm and Moon is Blue in particular, but also with Anatomy of a Murder.
Yeah, yeah. Let's use the Hays Code. I mean, it's a good opportunity to kind of look at the origins of these post-war or crime procedurals in general, because, and you already brought up the gangster films, how it's not something that you're as much a fan of, but it seems like there's definitely an element of the gangster film that led to where we are now. Likewise, wartime, there was plenty of documentary filmmakers making projects there, prominent Hollywood filmmakers going over and making documentaries. At the same time, there was
some of the greatest filmmakers made World War II documentaries.
Exactly. John Huston.
World War II films are extraordinary.
Yeah, right.
Extraordinary, and he was not the only one.
Right, there were a number of them. On top of that, there were also procedurals that were being told on the radio, and that's an interesting element. We had like Gangbusters, Dragnet, as some radio shows before TV really came about. How do you see the journey from kind of like those types of films and storytelling styles to where we kind of expand federal law enforcement, the FBI looking for more image building through Hoover, all of that sort of stuff at this point, kind of post-war, that kind of leads us to where we are right now?
I don't know about leading us to where we are now.
Well, and when I say now, I mean in the conversation we're having in the post-war period. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, you don't mean now, literally.
No, I don't mean now. Right.
That's a complicated.
Totally.
Parameter.
Yeah.
I think the Dragnet and that kind of show had an enormous influence on these procedural films, where the process itself became almost the star of the film. You feel that in The Naked City and He Walked by Night, the post-war, the immediate post-war films.
Yeah,
they're very much about the procedure of catching a criminal.
Yeah,
how do they go about it? How does a criminal get caught? Here's how the institutions work. Law enforcement processes are in place in order to catch the bad guys. Isn't that what those films are about? And celebrating?
Yeah, exactly. Watching the police sketchers draw
ambiguity.
Yeah.
See, I'm drawn to the 50s films like Trial and Anatomy of a Murder, which are ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
You Walk by Night and The Naked City are not ambiguous.
Very straightforward.
There's a bad guy, and the bad guy have to be brought to punishment. And here's how the system is set up to catch them. No matter how elusive they might be, no matter how tenuous the clues, our institutions are strong enough and clever enough and technologically gifted enough to catch them.
Yeah.
And the ambiguous morality of the later films which I find more interesting, are not there in Naked City and You Walk by Night. Aren't those and Boomerang?
And Boomerang.
Well, that's a little different.
There's a little a little bit more pushing back on that one, I'd say. Is there an element of the blacklist, which was also happening at this point in time, that, I don't know, would you say that it was driving some of the filmmakers toward these kind of semi-documentary types of stories because perhaps it was a way to say, like, I'm just filming like reality, what's really here, like a little more, I don't know if they could say apolitical, but still find ways to critique stuff using a style that seemed more realistic. I mean, you kind of alluded to that already with Otto Preminger as far as the way that he was, I guess you could say, playing the system as far as kind of maneuvering a little bit. Do you see that as something that was going on?
Yes, and the blacklist in this period is almost unavoidable, whether it's dealt with directly or more often obliquely or indirectly. This was the blacklist period, where if you were accused of being a communist or fellow traveler, your career could and would be destroyed. That permeated filmmaking from 1947 to 1955 in particular.
Yeah.
That hangs over all of Hollywood filmmaking. It was unavoidable. Right. Hollywood was under fire by the House Un-American Activities Committee for alleged communist infiltration. And were there communists in Hollywood? Yes, there were. Right. And most of the people they accused of being communists were communists. Not all of them, but most were, or fellow travelers. And the next question would be, so what?
Yeah, right.
But you couldn't ask that question.
No.
In that period, you couldn't ask that question. Does that hang over the sensibility of our crime films? Yes.
Yeah.
Even if not at the first level, beneath the surface.
Right, but it's still something that is there.
It's there.
It's interesting because, like, we definitely talked about that a lot in our last episode about paranoia thrillers. There was a lot of the communism element that arose. We don't see that. I mean, we definitely will see it in some, like Trial. You already brought that one up. You definitely see some of it in Night People, right? There's an element of
very much so.
of that particular story. But very much so. In so many ways, these stories are more about just crime and the procedure of trying to stop them. Well, and so it is interesting when the blacklist and when the communist elements do weave into them.
Well, look, Naked City was directed by Jules Dassin.
Yeah.
A communist who had to leave this country to continue his career. Are there left-wing touches in the film, Naked City? Yes, there are. Yes, there are. There is a depiction of an absolutely empty-headed Park Avenue matron who's rich, the rich person.
Right.
I think that rich person was written by, conceived by a lefty.
Interesting. The portrayal, yeah.
The portrayal is from the point of view of a left-winger. Would be anti-capitalist, anti-the wealthy. If you live on Park Avenue and you're rich, you're either stupid like this woman or corrupt. So I think the film does show some left-wing prejudice or bias, or perspective, if you want to keep it neutral. But it's not a film about the blacklist. Yeah, it's not a film about communism.
No,
it was made by communists and fellow travelers.
Well, and that's an interesting one because, as we just said, that was an earlier one that doesn't have as much of those ambiguities that you like so much in the 50s. But it is interesting that it still has those elements in there that you can pull out to see some of what Dassin was saying. So I find that to be interesting.
It has an element of it dissects class in this film, in this country at that time. It's about different class levels in New York, from the very wealthy to the really disadvantaged and marginalized.
Yeah.
Not in terms of minority groups, but in terms of economic status and social status. That class division is very much a part of the film.
Yeah,
But the criminal is a criminal. He doesn't represent anything. And just as the criminal in He Walked by Night, the madman played memorably by Richard Basehart, doesn't represent a political point of view. He's a nutcase.
He's just bad.
And he's got to be just a bad guy, and he's got to be caught. He's a loner. There's something seriously wrong with him, and it's the job of the law enforcement figures to catch him.
That's an interesting one, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure. But when you look at something like In Cold Blood and how the criminals are portrayed there, in just 20 odd years later, the work to try to create some sympathy or empathy with these killers so that you could get into their heads a little bit and try to understand their story, and it hints at that in He Walked by Night. Like, we're getting a sense, okay, there's some psychological damage this guy has, but it's not something that they explore at all. It's not something they were interested in at that point in time, but they are later.
At that point in time, whatever values you're talking about possible audience understanding or empathy comes largely from the presence of the actor.
Yeah.
But it is not something that's written into the script, whereas it's an essential element of In Cold Blood, is to try to understand these characters who would at first glance be simply beyond the normal, but why and how? But they don't care about that in He Walked by Night. He's a nutcase.
Not at all.
He's got to be caught. He's got to be stopped.
That's what the whole point is.
He's pathological. Do we know why? Not really. Do we care? Not really. There's some slight attempt to understand him, but very slight. It's not, as you say, it's not the film's focus.
That's not what we're looking at. Well, I always like talking about kind of where this fits in the cinematic family tree and like what makes it distinct from other styles that we'll say are adjacent, or as you said when we talked about film noir, that have stains of it, right? Like I definitely would say that you can see film noir stains through a lot of these post-war crime procedurals.
Just about every one of them, really.
Yeah, exactly. There's also crime thrillers. You can look at social problem films and you can see how some of that is kind of weaves its way into here. And then even courtroom drama, if you look at that as its own category or kind of subgenre, you can see how it kind of falls into this as well. Likewise, like some other things, we talked about the semi-documentary elements, stories about the wrong man. I think that's always a fun one. And then prison stories. That certainly would become a whole other genre or subgenre down the road as far as prison pictures, often B pictures, but it's interesting to see kind of how they're getting started at this point. And then by the time we're looking at In Cold Blood, you're certainly getting to a point where it's more investigative realism and seeing where that goes. Do you see other things kind of that are threading into these post-war crime procedurals that like other genres or subgenres?
Well, I see, for instance, He Walked by Night, which you mentioned two directors, Alfred Worker and Anthony Mann. I think it's been pretty established that Anthony Mann was the dominant.
He's the main one.
Director. It has his touch, his film noir touch. The extraordinary thing about He Walked by Night, overriding everything we've said about Procedural, is the cinematography by John Alton, which is truly extraordinary. There are dozens of shots in that film that could be extracted from the film and shown in a photo show at a museum. Museum quality chiaroscuro images of high contrast between light and shadow. That film is an example of Hollywood's version of German expressionism. Interestingly, we talked about neorealism, Italian neorealism. In He Walked by Night, there are two visual strains that go into the making of that film. The procedural elements of the film, which are often very documentary-like and neorealist. And then when we are with the maniac, the main character, and his world is depicted in sharp contrast between light and dark with virtuoso compositions of light and shadow. German expressionism.
Yeah.
Part German Expressionism, part Italian Neorealism, part semi-documentary, but part highly stylized post-war film noir thriller. The film is schizophrenic visually.
Well, and John Alton handles it well. He's able to kind of like do that dance between all of it. And, I liked that we also ended that story. We'll get to it, but ending it in the sewers, and another of these great films from this period, similar to The Third Man, where we end up shooting some beautiful chase sequence in the sewers. And I liked that quite a bit.
And to go to another genre, do you know the 1954 thriller Them, about the giant ants?
Oh, yes.
Which ends in the sewers under the Los Angeles River.
Right. Yeah.
And same virtuoso compositions of tunnels receding into the distance. But some of those tunnel shots in He Walked by Night are absolutely thrilling visually. I mean, they're so great, you're almost thrown out of the film and the story, and you see the mastery of Alton's artistry.
Yeah. Yeah. Alton, just beautiful photography, and I think truly was a great noir photographer. Also works well in these stories. So I'm glad you pointed him out there. Do you see in this post-war period that we're looking at, within specifically the post-war crime procedural, the mode that we're in right now of this crime genre, do you see much in the way of evolution from where we're starting in kind of like the semi-documentary Naked City, He Walked by Night, Boomerang, all the way to the mid-'60s where we're talking about In Cold Blood? Are you seeing much in the form of how these types of films evolve in that period of time?
If you're talking about visually, no, because He Walked by Night already has the two strains that are essential. I mean, It's very stylized, and it's also documentary-like. Hitchcock's The Wrong Man is, for the most part, documentary-like.
Yeah.
But it certainly has moments of visual stylization. The Trial is documentary-like, and it isn't at all a fancy film visually.
Right.
It's very procedural-oriented about how do you conduct this kind of a trial, this kind of a court case. Anatomy of a Murder is wonderfully objective and detached visually, as Otto Preminger often was. Although we could certainly do the film noir styling, but it doesn't at all look like a typical film noir. It looks like the post-war semi-documentary.
Yeah, right.
Cold Blood has the two strains that we've talked about in He Walked by Night.
Yeah, right. A little seeing both sides.
Shots. Conrad Hall's magnificent cinematography. I think he won the Oscar for it. I believe he did. Magnificent, but it has both the location shooting, which makes a big difference, as it does right from the beginning with The Naked City, which has some of the best, to this day, some of the best on-location New York City filming ever.
Yeah, the whole climax is just a stunning one to watch still. I mean, it's just incredibly put together. But
not film noir style, documentary style.
Yeah, right, exactly. Even then, at that point, it still is more of a documentary style. Anything else as far as its evolution? Are we seeing it evolve over this period of time? I mean, I know we kind of start talking about some courtroom films and stuff like that, but I don't know. I guess I'm not sure if like when TV starts coming in, does it start creating some of the shift in what we're looking at in the post-war crime films? Do you get any sense of that?
I'm not sure I agree with the shift. I think the template is set in a film like He Walked by Night.
So it stays pretty solid through this entire period.
Yeah, I think it stays pretty solid. Anatomy of a Murder doesn't have visual stylization. It's very detached and objective, as it should be, for telling that story of following a case from almost beginning to end. In Cold Blood has the mixture of styles.
Right.
But I don't see that as an evolution. I see that as a brilliant articulation of what was already established in 1947-48.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
So I'm resisting a little bit.
No,
race and evolution. I'm not sure I agree.
No, well, I'm not saying there is one. I'm just curious, like if there's anything that changes over the course of this, or if it does stay pretty consistent.
I think
across.
It stays pretty consistent. What changes is infusion of politics and blacklist and the communist threat, the Red Scare, so to speak.
Well, and the ambiguity that you like so much,
and
obviously.
The moral ambiguity,
right.
And a franker sexual content. In Cold Blood has language that you wouldn't have heard in the 40s, for instance. So there's that kind of evolution.
Gotcha. Right. All right. Well, before we get into the films, a quick note, the conversation you are hearing today is the public episode. 6 films, a full exploration of this style. But Foster and I actually discussed 11 films total. The 5 you won't hear today, Boomerang, Riot in Cell Block 11, Night People, Trial, and the Phoenix City Story, are part of the extended member discussion. If you want access to that and to every other member episode, you can join for $5 a month or $55 a year at truestory.fm/join. Check it out. We'll be right back. Let's start digging into the movies. Let's jump into The Naked City, Jules Dassin's film from 1948. This, in many ways, is the foundational post-war crime procedural. Really, I mean, Boomerang definitely had a lot of these elements, but this film really seemed to establish the mode's visual language, the structural template, and even the kind of the fundamental claim that the real machinery of urban policing is inherently dramatic. It's something that we actually want to kind of watch and stuff. The story of this one is a young woman who's found murdered in her Manhattan apartment. Detective Lieutenant Dan Muldoon leads the investigation through the actual streets of New York, interviewing witnesses, following leads, building a case through patient, methodical police work, until the killer is finally cornered on the Williamsburg Bridge. Again, location shooting, very much documentary style. We start and end the film and have it throughout of producer Mark Hellinger narrating and telling us, giving us this voice that feels like some sense of authority, right? I mean, that's really emphasized with this film.
Absolutely. And with the sort of New York tinged accent of New York of that period. So he sounds like a real reporter, the voice of a contemporary authority figure. And even as you're recounting the summary, the film has no moral ambiguity.
No.
It
nothing.
is a bad guy who commits a murder, and the whole film is predicated on how the law enforcement system follows its own procedures to track him down. They're good, they're efficient, they're persistent, they don't stop, and they get him. That's it. And for me, frankly, the story isn't all that compelling, but seeing New York is what holds the film together.
Yeah, that's very true. It's how well, and actually, question about that, because Jules Dassin, again, somebody who had to leave, go over to Europe to film, so has a sense of kind of the European sensibilities. Is there something about him shooting New York that makes it seem different?
The French like to refer to him as Jules Dassin. No, he was a Jewish boy from New York.
Yeah.
He was a local boy who understood, born in New York, went to school in the Bronx. He understood New York. He's an American. He didn't have a European sensibility at that point at all.
Because he hasn't left yet, right?
He hasn't left yet.
Yeah, right.
He goes to Europe, and on the run, he makes a fantastic companion film to The Naked City called Night in the City. Do you know that one?
Yep, the boxing, the wrestling. Yeah,
yes.
The wrestling story, yeah. Fantastic film.
That's also a film set in a city and about a city. But that film is post-war London. And London is treated expressionistically, not in documentary style. New York in The Naked City is treated documentary style.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Very similar.
We just talked about The Naked City over on our other podcast, The Next Reel, and I don't think that came up actually as far as that film having more of an expressionist tone to it as opposed to this film. And that actually makes me want to revisit it now that I've The Naked City fresh in my head, just to kind of see that comparison, because I can't recall that. But I think that's interesting that he chose to shoot this one and that one in such different styles for each of the cities.
Completely different styles. And I think part of it was he was a New Yorker, and New York was home ground. And the value of that film now for me is as a documentary portrait of New York in that exact time frame.
Yeah.
Whereas
it's fascinating to see.
London, if you go to Night in the City for a documentary treatment of 1950 London, you've gone to the wrong film, because it's not a document of London. It's an expressionistic, subjectivized version of this man, played brilliantly by Richard Widmark, on the run. Yeah. So that film has a psychological complexity that Naked City doesn't have. We don't get involved in those characters. They're not complicated or enthralling characters. The title of the film tells you the focus of the film. It's about the city.
True. Very true. Does the narration add to that as far as kind of keeping us distant?
Objectivity, sure.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm reporting it as it happens. I'm sharing with you our procedures for getting the villain.
Yeah.
It absolutely adds to it. Mark Hellinger had just the right voice to be the narrator in this post-war semi-doc.
Yeah, really interesting. This film came out the same year as He Walked by Night, another semi-documentary police procedural, different studio, different city. What does it tell us that two films with essentially the same structure and style appeared simultaneously, looking at opposite coasts?
Well, Naked City is major studio. That's Universal International. And He Walked by Night is Eagle Lion, Poverty Row. It's amazing that the film looks as good as it does. They probably had a budget of $25.
Yeah, right.
And even the expense of location shooting was very limited, I'm sure. The film was made for practically nothing. It was all about, it's an exercise in style. Whereas Naked City is an expensive production. Those location shots took a lot of work. It may look as if it's spontaneous, but those big scenes were staged, requiring a lot of pre-production and a big technical staff. He Walked by Night depends on the genius of John Alton in working in close collaboration with Anthony Mann and the other director, Alfred.
Worker, right. Let's start talking about He Walked by Night. Again, Alfred L. Worker, Anthony Mann, toss up with the direction of the film. This film, based on the true story of Erwin Walker, a former police technician who used his knowledge of police procedure to evade capture after killing a highway patrol officer. The LAPD investigates with the same technical rigor the killer brings to his crimes. Composite sketches, forensic analysis, systematic witness interviews in a cat and mouse procedural that ends in the storm drains beneath the city. This film, I'm curious, especially because your book, I love your subtitle on your book that you have here, The Collapse of the Studio System, The Thrill of Cinerama, and the Invasion of the Ultimate Body Snatcher, Television. This film, my understanding is that really kind of spawned Dragnet as far as like taking the police procedural and shifting it into that, taking that tradition of what would be a police procedural and delivering it to mass audiences on TV. Do you see that line as far as like this film being the one that really kind of brought that to the forefront?
Well, in a way, I'd see The Naked City as more of an influence on Dragnet, because Dragnet was pretty much documentary style.
Yeah.
And Jack Webb with that unforgettable deadpan.
That feels very like the voiceover, right?
The voiceover of Mark Hellinger, super masculinized, but no range in the voice. It's very monotone. That's part of the effect of it.
True.
As if men couldn't have expressive voices. Their masculinity was encoded in having voices that weren't expressive. Deadpan. I think Naked City and Dragnet have more in common. But He Walked by Night, as we talked about, is schizophrenic because a lot of it is very much procedural based. And the investigative agents in He Walked by Night really don't have any personality at all. As is often the case.
Yeah. I guess from what I read, Jack Webb actually met the tech advisor from during production of this film. And that kind of that conversation that he had with the technical advisor inspired him to kind of create the radio show, which then turned into the TV show. So I guess that's the thread that I was talking about. But you're right.
He's literally in the film, after all. Jack Webb is in this film.
He's is he in the film? I was saying he was meeting with the police technical advisor and was talking to the technical advisor on the film, Marty Wynn. Oh, you're right. He is in the film. He plays Lee Whitey.
In the film, yes.
Yeah,
Jack
you're right.
In the film.
Yeah.
He's a literal, and he's already has the deadpan style.
Yeah.
He's very much secondary in the investigative team, but he's there. And if you know you're Jack Webb, you spot him immediately, and he's already Jack Webb, which means very little expression in the face or the voice. But that was his calling card.
Yeah,
very little expression. It worked for him at that time.
Is there something about these films where they're getting these buy-ins from the institutions, like this one, working with the LAPD, to kind of like, does that compromise the objectivity in any way, or is the authenticity that it produces worth the cost?
It's probably a little bit of both. It certainly supports, quotes, authenticity. The police department is working with the film. They're giving technical advice. They're on the premises. And then if you could step back from that, you say, well, if they're cooperating, they're surely demanding that it be favorable, that the depiction be favorable. And of course, in terms of the screenplay, it is. Everything they do leads to identifying and capturing the killer. So the system that's in place works. You know, it's a justification and an endorsement of the system.
Yeah, I think it's interesting element that we're kind of endorsing the system. But I think what's fascinating, and I guess we're not seeing it as much in these films, but as you talk about like the ambiguity that we start to see, where we start seeing questions within the institutions of like, are they abusing their power? How are they manipulating the system to get what they want? And I don't think that we necessarily are seeing that too much yet, like with any of these films so far. Maybe Boomerang.
Boomerang is more complex, but the two films we're talking about now, I think the system itself is left untouched, and the films are made to celebrate the fact that the system is strong, inviolate, and gets the criminals. Yeah. It's designed to capture the criminals.
Very much so.
And you see the investigative work and the scientific work is very meticulous. And the fact that the investigators don't seem to have much personality or emotion is part of it. They are their job, and they're good at their job.
Yeah. Great way to describe them. They very much just are their job. That's what we get out of those characters.
We don't go home with them. We don't see emotional depth or complexity. We see them on the job. The Scott Brady character wants to avenge his partner, and there's a little bit of an emotional motivation there, but he's kept it at a certain distance. We don't get to know him.
Yeah,
he's an investigator. He wants to avenge his friend, but beyond that, we don't get to know him. And the implication is we don't need to know him. We need to know the process.
Yeah,
of hunting down the killer.
I will say an interesting element of all of these films, including this one, is looking at, because of the documentary approach that we're getting, the semi-documentary approach that we're getting with so much of these films, is we're getting a really interesting glimpse into how policing worked at that particular time. And I chuckled quite a bit through these early films, seeing like when they would do the prisoner lineups and have them stand up and have the witnesses point them out, that they were all in the same room together back at this point in time, which obviously has changed these days where you're looking through something so they can't identify who's actually pointing them out. So it's funny to see the things how they were doing things that led to other changes within our procedures that we have today.
But the film, just as you describe it, the film is very confident that the institutions work. that the systems that are in place at the time the films were made are strong, solid systems that have a big success ratio.
Yeah.
What we have leads to success. That's what the films tell us, really. What
Truly.
we do, how we operate, we're going to get the bad guys. The institutions are strong. The questioning comes later. Not now.
Let's shift gears and talk about, this is an interesting one for the list, Alfred Hitchcock and The Wrong Man. Certainly something that feels different for Hitchcock in the scope of his films, although it is a crime film. And certainly some people say that in some capacity, as a person who always grew up with a fear of the police, this could be perhaps the most biographical of his films.
And
this
also,
film,
he was a Catholic, and this
that's
film
right.
turns on the faith, believe
exactly.
it or not.
Yeah. This film follows Manny Balistrero, a musician at the Stork Club, who is mistakenly identified by employees as the man who robbed them. The cops arrest him, the DA prosecutes them, and the system grinds on, correctly following its own procedures at every step, while Manny and his family are destroyed. This is also based on a true story. Where does this fit in with Hitchcock as far as what he brings to films, shifting gears to do something that's a little less of his traditional style and more kind of this semi-documentary approach?
It's very much a shift in gears for Hitchcock. And the film suffered commercially for it. It was a disaster commercially. I'm old enough to have seen it when it came out in 1956. Yeah. And I remember going downtown to the downtown Paramount Theater with a friend. First Saturday matinee of the film. It was a theater that seated, I believe, 3,000. If there were more than 15 people in the audience, that would have been something. And people came out of the film, the 15 of us, sort of shaking their heads. With Alfred Hitchcock, the audience immediately, as soon as the film opened, decided it was not how they wanted their Hitchcock, and they didn't want to see the film. It was a disaster at the box office.
Interesting.
And it is only recently that it has begun to receive the recognition it deserves.
Well, what's fascinating about the film is, in one way, you could say the system is not doing anything wrong, right? They're following their procedure. Everything is by the book. I mean, is that why this ends up being kind of like one of the most disturbing films we're talking about? Because an innocent man is essentially almost completely put away.
But there's something wrong with the system. The police investigations are biased, almost inhumane.
Although all the witnesses, like every single one of the witnesses, say that was the guy.
And the witnesses are, so many of our films, actually, we could have a subtopic about the reliability of eyewitness reports. I think every one of our films, eyewitnesses are shown to be wrong.
Yeah.
And the reliability of eyewitness reporting is demolished. Correct me if I'm wrong, in every one of the films?
Yeah, if not every one of them, quite a lot of them, for sure.
Quite a lot. I mean, it almost the reversal hinges on a clever lawyer exposing eyewitnesses as being mistaken.
Yeah, true.
12 Angry Men, for instance.
Very much the case, yeah, very much.
Essential to 12 Angry Men.
Yep.
Essential to Boomerang.
Right. Yeah, even
to
Trial.
Man.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting, but I wonder, like, what is Hitch saying as far as like when we get to the end of the film? Because you're right, Catholicism, the act of prayer, all of that kind of comes in as a moment here. The real Manny is vindicated, but his wife isn't. She ends up, in an institution because she's taken this so personally. She kind of breaks. Does the film kind of earn its resolution?
Yes. Yes, it does. You mean the happy ending?
Yeah, mostly happy ending, right?
Mostly happy ending, with the title telling us that it was 2 years before the wife recovered, and we see the family in long shot walking on a beautiful street in Miami. They've left New York forever. And all of that's accurate, by the way. It's all
based
true.
on true story. Yeah.
And I think Hitchcock was adamant in maintaining the truth. But I think what you said at the beginning, Andy, is essential in terms of placing this as a Hitchcock film. Hitchcock was very open of his distrust of and fear of the police.
Right.
And this film is very much about the intimidation tactics of the police. The police are the villains in this film. The Manny Ballestero character is innocent, but the police convict him on some very flimsy pretexts.
Yeah.
And when he walks out at the beginning of the film, when the character walks out of the Store Club down the street and he's framed by two policemen. Do you remember that shot at the beginning?
Yep.
And it's almost physically entrapped by these policemen. That tells us something about that's a preview of coming attractions.
Yeah. And a very Hitchcockian shot too.
Very Hitchcockian shot, but it's very much a film about the unreliability of police work. If in their earlier films, Naked City and He Walked by Night, we talked about how scientific and technical and competent and truthful the law enforcement figures are. Yeah. In this film, they're very corrupt.
Very different. Very different.
Very different. They're very vulnerable. And they're the criminals in the way they treat this innocent man. And after all, you could say if the police had any reading of human nature, they'd look at the Henry Fonda character and say he couldn't possibly have done what he's being accused of.
Right.
And even if he had, doesn't the punishment exceed the crime? What did he do?
Yeah,
he didn't kill somebody. What did he do?
Yeah.
It was a holdup for a certain amount of money. Okay, but that doesn't require the kind of incarceration and interrogation that he's given as if he's a mass murderer.
Very different, yeah. Let's follow the Fonda path. Talk about 12 Angry Men, directed by Sidney Lumet. This one, 12 jurors retire to deliberate on the murder case of a teenage boy accused of killing his father. 11 vote guilty immediately, and juror number 8, votes not guilty, not because he's certain of innocence, but because he thinks the case deserves examination. The film is the 95 minutes of argument that follow. This is a fascinating single-room film. We're pretty much largely in the jury's deliberation room for the bulk of the thing. It's fascinating because this film has been read as both an endorsement of the American jury system and a critique of it. Do you find one of those readings more persuasive than the other? Or is it open-ended?
I don't agree. No, I think it's a fabulous film, but I think it's the most pat of all the films that we've talked about, in the sense that I think it's absolutely an endorsement of the system, unambiguously, with no complexity whatsoever. The system works.
It only works because of the one guy, though. Like, if he hadn't been there, then the whole thing could have collapsed.
But when you've got 12 people, it's very likely you're going to have one who will do what the Henry Fonda character does. I think it's very contrived. It's very set up. It's very easy. It's the least morally challenging and ambiguous, probably, of all the films we're talking about. And it's an extremely well-made film, and I think it's terrific. Well, but I think it's a little simple. It's too easy.
It is pretty easy, but what's interesting is by the end, we still don't know if the defendant is actually innocent. And I think that's what's interesting about the end of the film, is we're left like, is he guilty? Is like, how are we reading that?
I'll tell you how I read it. That shot of the young man at the beginning of the film, when you see him looking into the camera with those big eyes, and then his image sort of melts away. His image hangs over the entire film. He's innocent. Okay. That kid is innocent, or a victim of circumstance. Yeah. And I think it's very, very manipulative. We see this enormously sympathetic figure with those big, sometimes you see a dog with eyes you can't resist.
Yep. Same sort of face.
Same sort of face. That's brilliantly cast, but very manipulatively cast. He's innocent.
Okay. Well, let's talk about one that's a little more complex. Let's go to Anatomy of a Murder, 1959, Otto Preminger. Very complex. And I mean, you, having written a book about Otto Preminger, this is one that you certainly will have a lot of thoughts regarding this film. In this film, we follow a rural Michigan lawyer who takes on the defense of an army lieutenant charged with murdering a bar owner who may have raped his wife. The case turns on legal definitions, irresistible impulse as a defense for temporary insanity, and on the competing performances of lawyer, client, and witnesses in a courtroom where the truth is always, at least partly, a construction. This is such a fascinating film. And again, going like to the last one, is Preminger actually interested in whether justice is served or in just the mechanics of the system itself?
Preminger was by training a lawyer.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
His father was a very prominent lawyer in Vienna.
Huh.
And he went to law school in Vienna and got a law degree and was always very interested in American jurisprudence.
Fascinating.
He loved our system of trial by jury. He loved it. And the Arthur O'Connell character, Arthur O'Connell, quite justifiably was Oscar nominated for that glorious supporting performance. Mm-hmm. In that speech near the end, which is, I think, the finest moment in all of Otto Preminger's work, he says, in effect, he makes a tribute to the American system of trial by jury. Most of the time, he says, you bring 12 strangers together. Not most. You bring 12 strangers together, and most of the time, they make the right decision.
Yeah.
Film is about belief in the system, and the system is strong enough and sturdy enough and resilient enough to withstand and overcome, even as in the case of this film, a decision that's wrong. I think the Ben Gazzara character is guilty.
Yeah.
He's a slimy, sleazy character. I knew Ben Gazzara. I interviewed him a number of times, and I said,
"Oh, nice.
Every time I see you, I always think you should be arrested because you got away with a murder." And he laughed. He knew what I meant.
Yeah, right. It's very funny.
He got away with murder. He got away with murder. But the system is strong enough to withstand a case where justice perhaps is not served.
Yeah, right. Talk about Preminger. You already brought up the production code.
You think that character is guilty?
Oh, I absolutely think he's guilty. Yeah,
and gets away with it.
And I think Jimmy Stewart is, fairly, I don't know, I guess maybe it's controversial for Jimmy Stewart playing a character who is so cynical and self-serving, like his whole thing about like how he's pitching him to don't say it like that, talk about like this. Like, I'm like, wow, he is really playing the sleazy lawyer here. I kind of enjoyed seeing that.
Sleazy lawyer, and he's doing more than that. He's putting on an act as a country bumpkin.
Yeah.
In other words, he's showing us the James Stewart persona and exposing it as an actor's masquerade.
Yeah.
It's just a performance. And he says, trials are won by which lawyer is the better actor. And James Stewart gives a glorious Oscar-nominated performance. He's acting James Stewart, the country bumpkin. It's a performance. And Otto Preminger very much believed that trials are a performance.
Yeah.
That lawyers in the courtroom are actors who are playing roles, and the ones who play their roles with the most impact and forcefulness are the ones who win.
Yeah.
And the film does say that.
Yeah.
Is the system perfect? No. Is it? Can it be eroded from within? Up to a point. But Otto, who was a very proud, naturalized American citizen. He said we had the best system of justice in the world. And he absolutely believed in the system of trial by jury. And the film is about that, but brilliantly and ambivalently introducing a case where justice is not served, but the system continues anyway.
It keeps working, right? Yeah, fascinating. Let's talk about our last film on the list. We're jumping all the way to 1967, looking at Richard Brooks' In Cold Blood. Kind of really the capstone of all of this whole series here. The story: on November 15th, 1959, two ex-convicts murdered a Kansas farm family for a small amount of money and a safe that they believed existed, but actually didn't. Truman Capote followed the case for 6 years through investigation, capture, trial, appeals, and execution, and wrote In Cold Blood, the work that effectively invented the true crime literary form. Richard Brooks' adaptation follows the same arc, with Perry Smith and Dick Hickok as human beings rather than simply as killers. Here we kind of end up with the semi-documentary mode that we've been following, extended into kind of like this literary journalistic approach to the story, which again really paints an interesting portrayal of, particularly of the two, of Perry Smith. We really kind of get into the psychology of him and his history and his past that makes this so much of a darker story, because we're seeing the awful crime that they committed, but we're also getting a sense as to, what led them to this point.
And that is extraordinarily powerful. And it would be disingenuous to ignore another layer that the film has acquired, and that is Robert Blake, who plays Perry Smith unforgettably, was very likely involved in a real-life murder case.
Yeah, right.
Killing or arranging to have his wife killed.
Right.
He was a real-life criminal, a deeply troubled man.
Yeah.
And is it even sacrosanct to say that his performance in this film is a great performance? That scene at the end, with the rain coming down,
beautiful cinematography
coming down his face, and he talks about his relationship with his father, and how he hated his father and loved his father, is one of the greatest acted scenes I have ever seen in a movie. And you can't watch that scene without crying. It's so powerful. It must have come from something deep within the actor himself, who was obviously a deeply troubled man.
Yeah,
but who was a brilliant actor. That is a great performance. That is a great performance.
It's a great performance in a film that is so well structured and put together and edited, just the way that it flows back and forth from the investigators trying to figure out what's going on to the killers, as everything kind of builds to that head. And then we jump into the flashback to see actually what happened. I mean, it's a very dark story, but it's beautifully told still. And it like some of our other films in this series, it is it has the semi-documentary approach, but it also is getting into kind of like the more psychological elements, the darker elements, the more expressionistic elements.
At the beginning with the naked city, and he walked by night, where the criminals are kept at a distance.
Yes.
Here the criminals are brought up close, and we get their backgrounds. We get to know their families a bit. Superb performances by the fathers in each case.
Yeah.
And we understand how damaged these characters are and how probably beyond reclamation and redemption they are. But yet the film asks for some sympathy for them. And on the other hand, deliberately and controversially, the film keeps us very far from the Clutter family. We don't get to know them very well.
Very, very little bits. Very little bits.
Very little. Enticing little bits, and their averageness is on display. But we don't really get to know them.
No.
Whereas we do sort of get to know the criminals.
Yeah.
And then in the end, the film is an indictment against capital punishment. Again, asking for some sympathy for these criminals. And what's also fascinating is Scott Wilson is superb in his role as well.
Yeah.
Superb as the all-American, that ingratiating smile, and he's insane.
Yeah.
He doesn't commit any crime. I mean, he's there, but he doesn't kill the family.
Right.
It's the more sympathetic character who goes crazy.
Yeah.
Kills the Clutters because for a moment, he disconnects, and we see that he regards Mr. Clutter as his father.
Yeah.
As a father in place of his father. Just a flash.
Just a
illuminates. It illuminates the psychological derangement of that character. I just saw it again recently, preparing for our talk today. It's an American masterpiece. It does not have the reputation it deserves. It's a stunningly well-made film.
I completely agree. It really blew me away, just how perfect of a story it was and how it crafted everything.
And upsetting. It's
upsetting. It's very upsetting. Very upsetting.
It doesn't give you the happy ending and resolve things. I mean,
exactly.
Anatomy of a Murder ends with an ironic, ambiguous note, but so does this.
Yeah.
It asks for sympathy for the devil.
Truly.
And that's a very hard course to pursue, but the film does pursue it. It asks for sympathy for the devil. And Robert Blake, a tormented life, a tormented man.
Yeah.
That scene in the rain when he talks to the reverend, to the priest, the confessor, is one of the greatest scenes I've ever seen. I put it up there with Marlon Brando in the taxi scene on the waterfront.
On the waterfront, It really is, truly. Let's wrap up the conversation by just talking about where things went from here, if we can. Obviously, it seems like TV really kind of absorbed this mode entirely, right? I mean, we jump into Dragnet and these other TV shows, and then you can see like all the way through Hill Street Blues, Law and Order, The Wire. Like it's a thing that continues forever. Same thing with courtroom dramas, Perry Mason, all the way up through things like Better Call Saul. It feels like, and then true crime in and of itself has become a huge part of what people want. Clearly, people are drawn into true crime stories. The podcasting industry was taken over by true crime with Serial and other shows. And it really kind of like everything has shifted into like this element of people wanting more of these sorts of things that feel semi-documentary, investigation, discovery, a whole channel about that. Dateline, 48 Hours.
But notice, Andy, you're not talking about movies.
Well, right. Well, that's what I'm wondering. Like, is there still a thread? I mean, we still get courtroom dramas and we still get investigatory police stories, especially, I mean, Sidney Lumet certainly follows that a number of times with Serpico, Prince of the City, things like that. All the President's Men, I suppose you could say, is kind of looking at kind of the...
Yes, but those films are a while ago. Tell me your film in the 21st century that follows the patterns we've been talking about for the last few hours.
It might not be as semi-documentary, but if you look at something like David Fincher's Zodiac, I wonder if that might be one that might be the most influenced by what we've been talking about, because it certainly also doesn't have any easy answers, and could be read as fairly ambiguous.
That's a very strong film. Also, Seven.
Yep. Yeah,
but
David
I
Fincher
would say
clearly is
they're
a fan.
relatively rare.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't a common narrative mode in contemporary filmmaking.
That's pretty interesting. I wonder why.
There's a huge appetite for it on podcasts and TV, yes.
Well, I wonder if that's why, just because people's appetites are getting satiated in these other places. And so the film stories just aren't as prevalent.
Very possible.
Yeah.
Very possible.
Well, I mean, it was a fascinating conversation, Foster. Thank you so much for joining me and being here for all of this. Again, your book, Hollywood and the Movies of the 50s, has been a huge resource for me in this mini-series I've been doing. It's available. Everybody should check it out. We'll have a link in the show notes to it. And anything else that you want to plug before we head off?
Well, I'm working on the 60s now. So
are you really?
Next
Fantastic.
time, yeah. So I certainly, In Cold Blood is going to be prominently discussed in the new book.
Excellent. And I should also call out your Otto Preminger, The Man Who Would Be King book is one worth checking out as well. So
thank you.
All right, Foster, again, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
That is a wrap on our post-war miniseries. 6 episodes, 6 genres and modes, and the full arc of how one war reshaped what Hollywood could imagine, fear, and say. It has been one of the most rewarding creative runs that I've done on CinemaScope, and none of it would have been possible without the guests who brought their expertise to each conversation. I don't have a next episode date yet. I'm going to be taking a break after this run, and will surface when I'm ready. Please stay subscribed. Thanks for joining us on CinemaScope, part of the True Story FM Entertainment Network. Music by Orcus and Roy Spiegler. Find us in the entire Next Reel family of film shows at truestory.fm. Follow at The Next Reel on social media, and if you're enjoying the show, please leave us a rating and review wherever you listen. And as we part ways, remember, your cinematic journey never ends. Stay curious.